Good morning, and thank you for joining us for our Magic Morning. I'm Aniela Shuckburgh. I'm the chair of Magic Breakfast, and I'm delighted today to be stepping in to host this event for Lindsay McDonald, our wonderful CEO. The focus of today's webinar is social mobility and the interventions that are needed to enable it. We have a wonderful set of panelists today, so please do try and stay till the end if you're able. Before we get started, just a few pieces of housekeeping. If you would like to enable live transcripts, you can do this yourself by clicking the closed captions button at the bottom of your screen. We are recording today's session, and this will be available on Magic Breakfast YouTube channel, so please do share with friends and colleagues that may be interested in our work. At the end of the session, we will have a Q&A. So as we go along, as questions occur to you, please do put them into the Q&A box at the bottom, and we'll try to answer as many of those as we can at the end. And there will be a survey that pops up at the end of the webinar, so please do fill that out as well, so we can make sure that every Magic Breakfast, Magic Morning is magical. So our first speaker today is Nick Harrison, CEO of social mobility charity, the Sutton Trust. He'll be talking about the Sutton Trust's recent research into social mobility and the interventions needed to ensure that every young person in the UK, regardless of their background, has the opportunity to succeed. Thank you, Nick, and welcome.
Brilliant, thanks, Aniela, and morning, everyone. It's great to be here. I think we're going to try and keep this to 10 minutes, so I'm going to jump right in. Before I start, though, for anyone who doesn't know the Sutton Trust, as Aniela said, we're a national charity which aims to improve opportunity and social mobility for young people from low-income backgrounds. And we do that through our university apprenticeship and career access programs, where we work with around 12,000 young people each year, and through our research and advocacy, where we look at barriers to opportunity and solutions to those barriers from birth to the workplace, we say. And as Aniela said, I was going to quickly cover a recent bit of research today, which looked at the geography and opportunity of social mobility across England. And it's just England because we couldn't get the data in the same form for the other nations, unfortunately. We called the work the Opportunity Index. It was a big piece that it's data from 10 million people over 2 decades. We did it by linking schools data from the DFE with employment and earnings data from HMRC. So a big piece of work. If you just go on to the first page, please. So you can see here on the first page, the map of the Opportunity Index on the right-hand side there. There's an interactive one on our website. Green is good, red is bad. And if you look at the map there, you can immediately see how good London looks in green, for example. And for example, the northeast, where I'm from originally, looks really bad in red in the top right there. And we'll come back to the differences in opportunity in a moment. On the left of the page, though, are the factors which feed into the Opportunity Index. And what we did is, for young people on from a free school meals background, we looked at, firstly, how well they did in school. So their GCSEs at the Attainment 8 score, how well they did at A-levels, if they stayed on for A-levels. Post-16, what proportion were in education, training or employment, so how many were not neat, to use the term. Then moving on, what proportion progressed to university to get a degree. And then on the employment side, apologies, something's gone wrong with the fonts there. On the employment side, how many are in sustained employment age 28? And then for those in employment, what their average earnings was when they got there. And overall, you can see what we were trying to do was get a good spread of measures across education and employment to give an aggregate score for the index for those young people from a free school meals background. And if you just go to the next page, please. And as I said, there's an interactive map on the website. You can pull up stats for every constituency, like it's shown here. This is Clapham and Brixton Hill, which is my constituency, which comes out pretty average for London. So yeah, do go on the website, have a play, look up your local area, see how it fares. And if you just move on to the next page, please. But if we just zoom out for a second, what does the opportunity index say overall? And really the big headline is that London is far, far ahead of the rest of the country in creating opportunities for kids from low-income backgrounds. So all of the top 20 constituencies for opportunity were in London. And what you see is those London constituencies, they do well on both the educational side of the equation and the employment side of the equation. Outside of London, as you could probably see from the map a couple of pages ago, it's a really mixed picture. So, the Northeast and the Northwest typically do quite badly, although there are some bright spots in places like central Birmingham, central Manchester, for example. Overall, towns and sort of semi-rural areas seem to do worse, but again, that's not everywhere the case. So it's a bit mixed. And interestingly, you see some real big differences between local areas in the same overall geographic area. So the southeast, for example, is obviously a relatively prosperous area overall, but it has some really high opportunity areas and some really low opportunity areas, just a few miles from each other. So really mixed picture. And if you just go on to the next slide, please, my Chris Whitty impression. So I've just pulled out here the best and the worst constituencies. So East Ham in London is the best for creating opportunity for low-income young people. Newcastle West is the worst. And you can see from this page, the differences between areas can be really, really stark. The outcomes are really different between East Ham and Newcastle. You can see, so for kids from a free school meal background in these two areas, in Newcastle, only about 15% reach grade 5 in maths and English GCSE, compared to 45% in East Ham doing the same. Only 10% of those young people in Newcastle progress to university, compared to 35% in East Ham. In East Ham, almost all young people from a free school meal background go into education, employment, or training at 16. 83% you can see there on the right hand side, whereas only 38% do in Newcastle, meaning that the NEET rate, the not in education, employment or training rate, is really high in Newcastle. And then at the bottom there, overall you can see about 20% of free school meal pupils from East Ham reach the top 20% of earners by age 28, whereas from Newcastle it's only about 6%. So you can see from this page, really the success East Ham is delivering for less advantaged young people, but also how dire things are in low opportunity areas like Newcastle. And it's worth saying, in places like East Ham that do well, young people from a free school meal background do almost as well as the overall national average for all kids. And those areas really show that it is possible to level up and really provide some hope for what we could do across the country. Just go on to the next page, please. Yeah, and I want to just make the point also, this isn't necessarily about rich versus poor areas, right? There are poorer areas that do well, and there's rich areas that do badly. And East Ham, that we just saw, which does so well, is a relatively poor area. It's got a high rate of free school meals. You can see on the page there, 37% compared to 26% national average. And it's got quite a high rate of child poverty as well. Whereas Sevenoaks, for example, it's a relatively prosperous area that does really badly. Sevenoaks, it's got pretty average free school meal rates, just below the average. It's got quite low child poverty, but you can see, halfway down the page there, it does really quite badly on GCSE results. Only 12.6% of free school meal pupils achieving that grade 5 in maths and English. And then, one line down, only 5% of kids from a free school meal background in Sevenoaks progress on to university, compared to 35% in East Ham, and a national average overall of sort of 30+%. So if you're a young person growing up in a low-income household, it's really a lot better to do it in London, East Ham, than it is in places like Sevenoaks. And there's many, many examples of kind of differences, that postcode lottery, if you want to call it that, across the country. And that was really the point of doing this piece of research on the Opportunity Index, was to highlight those differences and try and understand what we do about them. So just go on to the next page, please. Yeah, clearly the big question, of course, is kind of how do we fix that in places like Sevenoaks or Newcastle West. And many of you probably know it's obviously our focus at the Sutton Trust. The UK is one of the worst developed countries in the world for opportunities for all. Behind only the US is worse. So we're very bad at creating opportunities for those from less well-off backgrounds in the UK. Obviously, there's no quick fix, otherwise, we'd have solved it by now. And that's because poor social mobility, it's determined by sort of multiple intertwined factors. It's obviously about educational opportunities. I'll come back to that in a minute. It's also about child poverty and health inequalities, of course. We know young people can't learn effectively if they're going to school hungry, which of course is where Magic Breakfast and your brilliant work comes in, or if they're living in unsuitable, damp accommodation without somewhere to study. So we absolutely need to fix child poverty. It's also about social capital, to get advice, to access things like work experiences and internships, which we know less well-off young people have less of. And of course, it's about economic growth, and economic growth across all parts of the country. Because even if education is working or was working, we need job opportunities for people to progress into. And many of the so-called left behind areas on the map do badly on education, but are also really struggling economically. As I said, I'm from the Northeast originally, so I always look at that area as an example. And that's an example of an area that has that kind of double whammy. It's poor on educational opportunities and it's poor on economic opportunities. And then just go to the last page, please. Thank you. And then, just to zoom in, for a second on educational solutions is obviously where we focus at the Sutton Trust. We've got a huge set of policies in our manifesto, which we published just before the last election, covering the whole journey from birth to the workplace. I've just pulled out some on the sort of early years and schools focused areas here because I thought that would be most relevant to people on this call. So just to highlight a few on early years education, we all know early years is critical to starting a young person's development on the right track, but the current eligibility criteria, which requires 2 working parents to get the free hours, essentially lock out the most disadvantaged kids. So provision is not available for those who could benefit most from it. And this is, a ridiculous situation. You wouldn't say, you can't go to school unless you've got 2 working parents, but we do say that about early years education in this country today. So we need to provide early years provision for all kids, at least up to 20 hours a week. We had a policy win recently. I'm sure Magic Breakfast was absolutely supportive of this as well on the extension of free school meals eligibility. That was great. We do, though, at the Sutton Trust still think we need more resources for schools serving disadvantaged pupils. And that could be delivered by, either uprating the pupil premium with inflation and extending it to post-16 and or tweaking the national funding formula to direct more resources to schools serving the most disadvantaged communities. And then finally, I'll just highlight there's a big issue with school admissions we've been campaigning on. And what you find is some of the best state schools in the country admit fewer disadvantaged pupils than live in their local areas, which just can't be right. And that could be fixed, for example, by giving pupil premium a priority in oversubscribed state schools. So there's lots of policies we could talk about. Hopefully that gives you just a flavour of the kind of things we're advocating for at the Sutton Trust. I think I probably should stop there in the interests of time and hand back to Aniela. And I think we'll come to questions a bit later on in the call. So thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Shows how complicated the geographical picture is. It isn't straightforward at all, but thank you very much. That was great to hear. Our next speaker today, Sophie Balmer, couldn't be with us in person, so we've pre-recorded a video, an interview with her. Sophie generously shared her story with our very own Jenna Durdle from Magic Breakfast, explaining how breakfast served in a nurturing environment can really be crucial for young people growing up in disadvantaged backgrounds.
So good morning, Sophie. Really appreciate you being available for our Q&A for our Magic Morning. To start off with, we know you as our board advisor at Magic Breakfast, and I wondered if you could just start by telling us a bit more about yourself and also your role with the charity.
Yeah, of course. Hello, I'm Sophie Balmer. I'm 21 and I'm currently a student at the University of Leeds. I do social policy, sociology and crime, so quite relevant. But I'm from Newcastle, if you can't tell. And I've grew up in a low income situation and like household, so that is why I'm kind of involved in this sort of stuff. I've been a board advisor for Magic Breakfast for about a year now, which is basically like sort of sitting on the board and giving like my perspective on decisions, because like often it isn't always young people, especially not with lived experience, are not often involved in like these sort of spaces and stuff. So yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us. And could you tell us a bit about what motivated you to be a child poverty campaigner?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I didn't really think a lot of it. I think when you're in these like sort of communities, it kind of just like, this just feels like life and this just feels like quite normal. It wasn't until the pandemic, which when I was about 15, 16, happened. And it was as if like overnight, obviously like free school meals, all that sort of stuff got cut. And it kind of just like really highlighted to us like how little importance like sort of children like me and sort of those who do go to school hungry, or the families that do rely on that sort of stuff, how less important they are in sort of like decisions, because it wasn't really something anyone really thought about until people started campaigning about it. And that was when I was like, no, this isn't fair. Like this, like sort of, I shouldn't feel like this as a young person. Like I deserve to be fed and sort of feel safe when I'm at home and eat and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that was kind of how I started off. And then from there, I've just kind of like not really left it behind. I just think it's really important. I think when you start doing this sort of stuff, you just realize how important it is for someone like me who isn't really always in these spaces to sort of be in these spaces, especially not because I feel like people in the Northeast are often neglected and that sort of stuff. So yeah, I've kind of just been going since, to be honest.
So I understand that you went to school where both in primary and secondary school breakfast was available. Just to start with primary school, could you explain what it meant to you to access Breakfast Club there for you and your classmates?
Yeah, of course. In primary school, like my breakfast club was it was a very fun, social, like chatting, like laughter, and very like friendly, nice environment. I think when I look back, all I have is like really positive memories from my primary school breakfast time. It was, it was a lot of the teachers sitting with you. It was very like, oh, how's your day been? How's your weekend been? That sort of stuff. It was just like sort of, it felt really safe and secure. And as much as like there were certain times, obviously no one wants to get up in the morning, and there was times that I'd walk in and I'd be like, oh, I don't want to do this, I want to go home, sort of thing. But then honestly, it only took like 5 minutes in breakfast club and I was like, oh, okay, I'm ready for the school day and I want to like get on with the sort of thing. And that's like the power of like what sort of in that a safe sort of encouraging environment can do to young people. Like I was ready for the day after that. Like I just needed a little wake up sort of food, some like fill my stomach up, and then yeah.
And what was it about it that made it feel safe and welcoming?
I think it was just because it was just like just such an environment. It didn't feel like sort of I was going to access something that was free. It felt very sort of like, oh, I was sitting with the teacher, because the teachers used to eat with me as well. Like I remember like it would be like sitting with the teachers and your friends and everyone was eating. It wasn't as if like I was the only one in the room that was eating, which can be sometimes, I felt, I don't know, sometimes the case when you go and access things that are like at that time was for like people like me, like low income students. It was just very like, just seemed like I was sitting down with like a massive, I mean, I know it's a bit cringe, but like sort of like a massive like sort of like family and stuff, because like you kind of know everyone in primary school. It was very like, oh, how did you think go last week, sort of thing. It was just, and just a positive environment. Like it felt like the teachers wanted to be there, which I think rubs off on us because then we want to be there, sort of thing.
I understand you also went to a secondary school that had breakfast provision. Could you tell me a little bit about what that was like?
Yeah, so I had such a good experience at primary school, and then I went to secondary school, and obviously everything changes when you get to secondary school. And yeah, it was a completely different provision. It was very like, you got in a queue, you got your toast that had probably been there for about half an hour, and then you like left quickly so no one would see, sort of thing. It was like, when you're a teenager, things are more embarrassing. So I think that when provisions aren't really made for that sort of like opinion or like idea that is how it is, like they're not, you know, they're not very strong. It's like, it's obviously I didn't really require the same sort of level of like nurturing and that sort of stuff as in like, let's get up and dance, because when you're 13, you don't really want to be getting up and dancing. But it was like, sorry, it was kind of like very, get in the queue, get in, like no one can see us in the queue, like it's really embarrassing and that sort of stuff. And to be honest, I just like stopped going, because it often even felt sometimes that the teachers were annoyed that they'd had to come in early, when you could hear the sighs and stuff. And like, as someone who was like really anxious about food and anxious about money and stuff at home, like when you hear someone who doesn't sound like sounds a bit annoyed that you're doing it, it's just like, it was just like, no, I'm not going to this sort of thing. So I spent majority of my secondary school not having breakfast and not like wanting to be there, and finding like that sort of environment quite stressful. And yeah, it just kind of showed how much like a change in environment can affect your food and how much you want to eat breakfast.
And how do you think that impacted your sort of educational experience, not having like a access to a decent breakfast each morning?
I think at the time it's very sort of like, you don't really realize, it's just like, oh, skipping breakfast, whatever. You know, like especially when you're from like my background, because you know, you're used to seeing, like I don't remember seeing my mom eat breakfast when I was younger, sort of thing. Like sort of you, it feels very normal, and like a lot of your friends in similar situations did as well. So it was like, oh, it was fine. So you don't really think about it. But as soon as I like got into an environment where breakfast was the norm, and breakfast was every day, and like, you know, when I got a sixth form, I got like a lot of breakfast was free and stuff, so I used to eat it, and it was like not embarrassing, and I'd eat it, and I would just realize how like awake and how ready to get on with it I was and stuff. I think I only realized the struggle that it is when you are in school hungry. When you're in school, then you're not hungry. It's like that contrast is crazy. Like when I got a sixth form, I was literally like, I'm a new woman. Like this is what it's like to sit in a lesson and be able to like concentrate on what's being said without like the thing on your head being like, oh, I wonder what's lunch. I hope like it covers because I've not ate anything yet. That sort of stuff. So yeah, it was definitely like really important.
And just thinking about the Sutton Trust's opportunity index that they published in May, that looks at the different kind of the geographic spread in terms of social mobility. I know that you've looked at the report. I just wondered what your take on it was.
I think for me, it was more just like, hopefully, I was hoping like it would act as like sort of like a bit of awareness for people, because, you know, like where I went to school, you know, it's not a nice area, as the graph sort of showed. It's a very difficult place. It's very sort of, when you're in these spaces, like it's really difficult to get out of them. And I think that this graph showed, hopefully for other people, is like, you know, when I was in school, like in secondary school, I remember so vividly when the teachers would be like, you can like do this, you can go to like Oxford and be a like this crazy person, and then like would be like, oh, okay, cool. They'd get, if they ever did get a token, which was very rare, but when they did, it was someone from London who'd ended up on this scheme that was just London based, and they'd like managed to get into this amazing uni, and we all had like sort of celebrating. It was a bit like, yeah, okay, that's very like good for that person, and obviously amazing, like social mobility is good in any sense. But when you're a young person from Newcastle who was literally being ranked like one of the highest for like difficulty in social mobility, like it's quite difficult to hear when you're in like young, because I remember I'd get so annoyed because I'd be like, there isn't them schemes up here, the unis don't do that for us, like all this sort of stuff. And I hope it just acts as like a reminder, as like things do look different like around the country, and things are different, aspects can be more challenging, especially, I mean, I talk a lot about Newcastle, but that's all I know. But sort of like how difficult it is there to get out of these spaces. Like I've witnessed it. Like I know what it's like to sort of, it's not as simple as just like, oh, go to uni, like things like, because I'm at uni now, and I'm part of like a very small percentage of my area who even get to uni. But even then, it's not as simple as like, oh, now amazing, like I'm off to London, I'm going to make like 90 grand a year, like see you all later sort of thing. Like it's just not that simple. And I think that there's just no opportunities where I'm from. And I think that does make the difference, and it does affect people in how well people want to work in school. Because if you know if it feels like there's nothing at the other end of it, like why would you sit and revise for your GCSEs? Because realistically and statistically, like you aren't destined to do anything other. And I know that's quite a pessimistic way to look at it, but it is the way that you look at it, and it's the way that the teachers look at it. Like I think they just presume, like I can't explain the feeling and the sort of community sort of vibe that you just kind of accept that you're going to go in the same job that your mom does, you're going to be the home carer and stuff, that like what my mom did, I just kind of presumed that was going to be me as well, sort of thing.
Thank you so much, Sophie.
Wow, I think Sophie has brought, like no one else, to life what it's like to be a young person growing up in a disadvantaged situation. But I think we can all agree she is definitely going to change the world. She's really amazing. So thank you, Sophie, in absentia. Our third and final speaker today joins us from Lawnswood Secondary School in Leeds, one of Magic Breakfast's 1,078 partner schools. Please welcome Jamie Rhodes, the school's Associate Assistant Head Teacher.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me with you. I begin with an apology. My office is located in probably the noisiest part of the building. I'm above the sports hall and next to the music practice rooms. So if that interferes with me, then apologies given in advance. A little bit of context, first of all. I am a geography teacher by trade, so I couldn't do a presentation to you without sticking a couple of maps on. That's where we are. It was really interesting listening to Nick talking about the Opportunity Index. It's something I, as a geographer and somebody who's leading in school on how we tackle some of the many challenges facing our pupils, taking interest in measures such as that and also similar ones such as the Index of Multiple Deprivation. And we're in a really unique and challenging, but also situation that presents lots of opportunities, where we are amidst some of the most deprived parts of Leeds and some of the most affluent parts of Leeds, some areas where we see a very high proportion of young people going on to further education and other such opportunities, and areas equally where we see very low levels of that, which creates a number of challenges to us. If I could have the next slide, please, and I'll give you a tad more context around Lawnswood, because the purpose of me speaking with you all today is to illustrate the kind of on-the-ground reality of what Magic Breakfast is doing and is achieving through that work with over 1,000 schools. So we have a very high proportion of pupil premium eligible pupils. So lots of pupils coming from home settings where breakfast is just not eaten. We know that we have kids walking through those doors each and every morning who have not eaten that morning, and quite possibly haven't eaten since they had their free school meal the previous lunchtime. So some of those pupils we see coming into Breakfast Club 7:30 in the morning, that's the first time they've eaten in 18 hours. We have a very high proportion of pupils who speak English as an additional language. I think that's of great relevance to us when we're talking about something like Breakfast Club, because it creates a barrier in terms of engagement and encouraging those pupils to come along to Breakfast Club, for example. We also take our pupils from a massive range of primary schools, which again creates challenges with that sense of community. We know, for example, schools that draw their pupils from a small number of primary schools, if they have an established breakfast club in that primary school, which lots of our local primary schools do and offer a fantastic provision, it can just become the norm to carry on attending breakfast club and other such opportunities. That doesn't quite work out for us when we're taking pupils from such a wide range. It also means, and it's mentioned on that next bullet point, we're bringing pupils from a very wide area. We have lots of pupils we would love to feed at Breakfast Club who, to get there for Breakfast Club before school, would have to get up ridiculously early. We did some recent pupil voice with our pupils around those who don't attend Breakfast Club, why you not? And something that really struck me was a child saying, I get up at 5:30 to get to school, sir. If I wanted to come to Breakfast Club, I'd have to get up at 5:15. And if I wanted to have time to eat breakfast before I left the house, I'd have to get up at 5:15. So one of the changes we've made in school is our breakfast club provision is not just before school. The food that's not consumed goes down to our pastoral teams, and it's there through the day, and we make sure that every child gets that. With the First Preference School, fewer than 50% of our pupils, which isn't directly relevant to the work of our breakfast club, but actually it is, because we really struggle to get kids who don't want to be here engaged with us. So one of our big challenges at the moment is with our incoming year sixes, saying to them, and look, we know you didn't put us as your first choice school, but here are the fantastic things we can offer. And we've really pushed Breakfast Club as part of that, and it has been successful. So we've been working with Magic Breakfast for just over a year. I've put on there we welcome about 120 pupils to Breakfast Club each day. We were over 150 this morning, which we were really pleased about. It's only 10% of our cohort though, and that's something we are continuing to look to grow. Next slide, please. So the impact of hunger. We see kids who are hungry. We also know we don't see kids who are hungry. There are some kids who will mask it. There are some kids who do not want to admit to having not eaten. There are some kids who don't come to Breakfast Club because of the perception that it's only for poor kids or it's only for kids who are on free school meals. That's something we're working really hard to address because we know there are kids that we are missing at the moment. So what does it mean for those pupils? It means they're not as engaged. If you're sitting there hungry, you are not as well engaged with your learning. You're not developing as you should physically. And anecdotally, we also know it presents as challenging behaviour. So we have a vested interest as a school in challenging hunger because it will make things easier for all of us, all our staff, all our learners. I've used the word misappropriation there because it didn't sound very nice using the word theft. That's a horrible word. By what I mean there is we have kids who are so hungry that they are going out in our community and stealing food. We have kids who are pressuring others into buying food for them because that is how hungry they are. I can genuinely see a marked reduction in instances such as that in the year that we've been partnered with Magic Breakfast. So the impact is fantastic. We have pupils, particularly some of our older pupils, who have jobs when they shouldn't have jobs, but they're helping their mums and dads put food on the table. They are not revising for their exams. They're going out to work because they need to bring money into the household. Such is the level of poverty in some of our families. Next slide, please. So there's the impact. We can tackle all those issues I talked about previously. We can build a sense of community. Breakfast Club is a wonderful place to be. I encourage all of my colleagues to come down to Breakfast Club. When we have new staff join our staff body, I say to them, get down to Breakfast Club and you will see what Lawnswood really is. You will see the wonderful diversity. You will see year 7s sitting with year 13s, playing games, having conversations. It's the most wonderful illustration of what our community really is. It's really positive for staff-student relationships. There are pupils who maybe their behaviour is not fantastic and we may have clashed with them over their behaviour. When they come into Breakfast Club and you're not telling them off for whatever it might be, but you're serving them a bagel, you're saying good morning, asking them how they're doing, that's massively impactful in terms of pupil relationships. It's also been really good in terms of opportunities for our pupils. So some of our Duke of Edinburgh's Award pupils volunteer at Breakfast Club now, and that's been massive in terms of our young people seeing their peers supporting them. It's not just the teachers being there and then the other school staff handing stuff out, it's them helping each other, which is fantastic. And I've also popped on their learning opportunities because I had 5 bullet points on my previous slide and I wanted 5 on this one. And by learning opportunities, I mean just those little conversations around healthy eating, for example, when we are serving up that food to them. Because there are some of our pupils who we can talk about healthy eating in PSHE and it doesn't really get through to them. But if we're talking to them as we are handing them their bagel and maybe suggesting don't put 3 portions of jam on there, that's maybe a bit too much sugar, we can really get through to them in a way we otherwise might not. Next slide, please. I shall conclude with my penultimate slide. There's one further afterwards on a slightly different theme with some feedback received from the pupils. We did a survey last week of the kids in Breakfast Club ahead of me talking to you all today, and I just picked out 6 of the quotes that I really liked that really summed up what Breakfast Club means. There are some of them there talking about the impact it has on them. That last one down there, thank you to everyone who makes Breakfast Club happen. Well, that's a message for those of you who are listening, the partners who provide the food to us. We are eternally grateful. Jenna picked me up on a grammatical error on that top right one. I'm doing better with my grades, and I had to explain that's how some of our young people talked with. It's an intensifier is the word bear. They're doing much better. And I left that. I like that. I left that in on purpose because that is a young man. I won't tell you his name for confidentiality reasons, but that is a young man who has previously presented in a very, very challenging manner, very disengaged, very significant issues with behaviour. And I am not going to sit here and say that Breakfast Club has changed that child and made him an angel, but it has begun that process of turning that young man's life around, and it is having a huge impact on his future chance of success in life. Final slide, please. A little bit of a different theme, but relates still very much. We, through our partnership with Magic Breakfast, hosted our first Aspiration Day earlier this year. So Arla Foods, who we know do fantastic work with the provision of the milk for Breakfast Club, sent in 12 of their staff to do a careers activity with some of our pupils, and we very deliberately picked pupils who we know from some challenging backgrounds and who are regular Breakfast Club attendees to come in and talk about careers, not just with Arla, but more broadly, because we know that one of the challenges facing lots of our pupils, but in particular those who really benefit from Breakfast Club, is a lack of aspiration, or perhaps more accurately, a lack of ideas as to what the future looks like for them. We heard Sophie on the pre-recorded message a couple of moments ago talking about that perception, perhaps, that if you're, I think it was care work, she said, didn't she? If your mum is working in care work, then you're going to go into that too. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. Society would fall apart without people doing those roles. But we know, for example, they're very low paid. And we want our young people to aspire to other things as well. And in particular, not just to think, my parents do this and therefore so must I. So opportunities like Aspiration Day to open our young people's minds to a wider range of opportunities and increase their social mobility are massively important. So thank you to anybody who's been involved with Aspiration Days. I know lots of them take place all around the country. That is your lot from me. Thank you very, very much for listening. It's been a pleasure to join you this morning.
Thank you, Jamie, for bringing Breakfast Club and breakfast provision to life for all of us. I think it's amazing to see how much you've been able to achieve in a relatively short time with Magic Breakfast. So thank you so much. We've now moved to our Q&A section of the webinar. There are lots of questions already, but if you have any other questions for our panelists, please do pop them into the Q&A now. If we can't get to them before we finish at just before 10, then we will come back to you directly. I'm going to try and group the questions a little bit, but maybe perhaps starting with some questions for Nick specifically. Nick, one of the questions that's come up is how the opportunity index shows the skew towards London doing so well comparatively. Our question is this still the historic impact of the London Challenge under Blair, or are there other reasons for this as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, I think the London Schools Challenge piece probably is part of it. As folks probably know, that really did do a lot to improve school standards in London sort of 20 years ago. And as I said in the presentation, you can see on the opportunity index, London does so well because it has the educational side working, but then also it has the job opportunity side working. And it's really both together, but that London Challenge is part of it. And it's, again, if you look at the Northeast again, on the opposite side of the spectrum, that has both sides not working. So the schools aren't performing as well to deliver, the grades for the less advantaged young people, and it doesn't have the job opportunities.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that Sophie mentioned in her pre-record, there's also possibly a bit of a feedback loop there, right? Because if you're growing up in an area where there's no jobs that need an A-star A level, maybe you're then less motivated to get an A-star A level, which is kind of what you were saying. So I think that's an important kind of feedback loop in that as well, really.
Yeah, that makes sense. And a little bit more on kind of how you see Magic Breakfast and other social mobility interventions contributing to the wider strategy for social mobility. I mean, what kind of impact do you think Magic Breakfast and other interventions can have on social mobility? And I'll come to you in a minute as well, Jamie, on the same.
Yeah. Look, it has a huge impact. And I think, Jamie, you've just sort of given us some great examples of the sort of frontline impact, right? But it's, as I said, social mobility it's a complicated topic with lots of factors feeding in there. It's partly education in schools itself, but it's partly that surrounding issues of child poverty, hunger, etc. And Magic Breakfast, and others are playing a really important part on that kind of poverty alleviation element of moving social mobility forward, I would say.
Jamie, do you want to add to that a little bit more? We've got a number of questions asking for kind of sort of more anecdotes about some of the children and young people that have been affected by Magic Breakfast and how you think that's helped them. So if you could elaborate a little bit more, obviously respecting people's confidentiality, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. There's a second example, another young man, one of our year 10 pupils, and again, very significant challenges in his educational career and in his home life, who volunteers with us, not through anything in particular like Duke of Edinburgh, just through seeing the impact it had on him as a year 9 when he first started attending Breakfast Club, and then having said, I can see how hard you guys are working, the staff who are getting in nice and early to set all this up. Can I come in early and help you out and set that up as well? Um, it means he has more positive relationships with colleagues. It means more and more people see that young man in a positive light. It gives him a sense of purpose. He is a young man who doesn't always get that positive feedback. He's a young man who struggles academically. And therefore, when he's getting that praise, not for getting 100% on a test, but for setting up Breakfast Club and ensuring 150 plus of his peers are properly fed on a morning, that's massive for him. He's learning skills. He's, at the very simplest level, if he's helping us with our stock rotation, he's improving his maths skills. So yeah, very, very significant. And that's just one example of a number who are doing things like that. Yeah.
And just to maybe add, I mean, that's a sort of a bit of just a learning for me from this morning's conversation, which is, Magic Breakfast is not just about food, right? It's about community and self-belief and that sort of wider aspects as well.
Yes, yeah, that's the magic of Magic Breakfast.
That's the magic, yes.
We spend a lot of time talking about that at Magic Breakfast. That is, the food is very, very important, but it's the other things that breakfast provision can bring to children and young people.
It's sort of more than the sum of its parts, really, isn't it?
Thank you. Yeah, well, that's good. Thank you. Jamie, if there was a school that was being hesitant about joining up with Magic Breakfast, hard to believe, I know, but if there was, what would you say to encourage them to become part of Magic Breakfast?
Yeah, I would reach out to somebody who's already doing it. So I took over strategic leadership of Breakfast Club in January, and then the colleague who was running things operationally left us for a new post a couple of months ago. So I've taken on a bit more of an operational role as well with Breakfast Club. The very first thing I did was I met with a lovely lady called Julie Harkness. Julie's deputy head over at Carmanor, local to us, and she is also, I believe, a trustee of Magic Breakfast.
Yes.
So went up to Carmanor and watched what they did and chatted to her around how they make it work and how they overcome some of the challenges that they face. And we are continuing to do so, put in place many of the recommendations she has given us. The other thing I would say, well, if I just go back to that point, actually, I will offer myself for such things in that circumstance, particularly schools in the local area. The other thing to say is just give it a bash. It's a lot of work initially. One of the things I'm working on at the moment is streamlining our processes. I don't know if I dare move my camera in case I'm going to be brave and I'm going to do it. We've got a shrinking pile of bagels over there in my office. We've had a couple of stock counting challenges where we've maybe had a little bit too much. Our numbers fluctuate massively. We had over 150 kids today. We had 40, I think it was, yesterday. It can depend on things as diverse as the weather. If it's raining, more kids want to come into Breakfast Club because they're not stood outside in the rain. So yeah, get your systems in place for things like monitoring your stock levels and get your staff on board. That's the other massive thing. We had Loretta, our partner from Magic Breakfast, came in to speak with colleagues about what it means to feed these children. And that was huge in terms of colleagues coming forward and saying, didn't realise quite how much of an issue it was. Sign me up.
Brilliant. This is a very specific question. What kind of foods do the children and young people receive at a Magic Breakfast? So I don't know, Jamie, you could tell us what you serve, but also
absolutely.
Elaborate if necessary.
So the bagels are by far the most popular. We also receive crumpets, we receive bread, we receive cereal, and we receive UHT milk. So yeah, that's our core offer. I believe you also do baked beans.
Yes.
So I'm exploring options around how we can make that work from September to expand our offer.
Well, I know Julie, when I visited Manor with Julie, they do baked bean toasties there. Yes. So it keeps them nice and relatively tidy for the children to eat, but gets their protein as well. So it's all good. Nick, could you tell us a little bit more about the picture for social mobility outside England, so the other three nations? I know that the Opportunity Index didn't focus on that, but if you have any insights there as well, please.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, we couldn't look at those specifically just given the data. But I think our strong hypothesis is you'd see sort of similar differences across the other nations, and it would follow the patterns that you see, in England. So, I would imagine places like, South Wales, for example, will be quite similar to the north of England, ex-industrial type areas. In Scotland, I suspect, you'd find some bright spots in sort of Edinburgh, but less elsewhere. Northern Ireland, I'm less sure about. And then it's worth saying outside of the UK overall, if that was the question, as I say, the UK is one of the worst for social mobility across the developed world. You find the best places are the Nordics, typically, places like France and Germany in the middle. Interestingly, though, in the English-speaking world, places like Canada and Australia do quite well, whereas the US does very badly. So it's a very mixed picture across the different countries.
You touched on at the end of your presentation about some of the things that might be done to help social mobility. There, if you had to have a specific intervention or interventions, you don't have to say magic breakfast, but what would you suggest? I mean, what could have the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, some of the biggest ones are, we do think the extension of the early years provision would be a massive one. That's quite an expensive one. But the fact that kids from low-income families are essentially locked out of the free early years hours because of not having two working parents, that's disgraceful, really, because they're just missing out on getting the right start. So that would be one. We, in the schools space, we're kind of calling for a national mission to close the attainment gap between rich and poor, and underneath that would sit a bunch of interventions, including some of the pupil premium things, but also things like magic breakfast, of course, right? So they would be two that I would highlight, and maybe if I could have a third, I think we would like employers to start measuring and reporting on the socioeconomic diversity in their staff bases, as they now do on gender and ethnic diversity, for example, because that would be a way of shining a light on the end of the pipeline, and then pulling through more diversity there as well, I suppose.
Yeah, great. I suppose that links in nicely with the aspiration days that Magic Breakfast works with our partner schools. And Jamie, you mentioned a little bit about that. In terms of your school population, where do the leavers tend to go after they finish school with you?
Very, very varied. So we have pupils leaving to Oxford, Cambridge, and other prestigious institutions. We have pupils who are going on to very little, and we don't know who they are in advance, but we can predict in some instances that there are some pupils where, from early in their time with us, we know that their socioeconomic status means they are going to struggle, and that is the biggest barrier I believe personally facing us in schools. We've got a growing proportion of pupils going on to university, but that can't be the only route, and we should be wary of painting that as the ultimate end goal. For many of our young people who go into apprenticeships, whether that's at 16 or at 18, that is fantastic, and that's absolutely the right thing for them. So our focus personally is not so much on let's get the maximum number of kids into what may be perceived as the best universities. It's getting every child into something that is right for them, whatever it might be.
Great, thank you. There are a couple of specific questions for Magic Breakfast, which I will attempt to take. So one of them was that we don't partner with many supermarket companies as yet. That is true. We would be delighted to partner with some supermarkets, given the opportunity. We have had a few attempts at this. So if anybody has any contacts, please do send them our way. Ocado does do some support for us, but yes, we're always looking for new partnerships. And as the question suggested, there's the opportunity potentially for obviously students having job opportunities at supermarkets as well, if there's some kind of partnership to come together there. But no, please do send any contacts our way. And then the other one is the elephant in the room, which is the free breakfast provision for all primary age children in England, which the government is committed to. We are working very, very hard with the government to get this off the ground, so to speak. There is the early adopter scheme at the moment that Magic Breakfast is very involved with. This is effectively a pilot for 750 schools. Of which Magic Breakfast is delivering breakfast to a portion of those, but also of the, I think, 19 advisors that the government has to help with this early adopter scheme, 9 of them are from Magic Breakfast. So we are very much front and centre with the government. And Lindsay, joking aside, I think the DFE have her on speed dial. So we are very much working closely with them, but at the moment it is still unclear exactly what that will look like. But we are working hard with them, and even as and when that happens, as we've discussed, there are 3 other nations in the UK, and the current policy does not include secondary or nursery age provision. So there'll still be lots for Magic Breakfast to do. Now, oh, somebody's just told me they have a friend at Tesco's. Fantastic. Great. I think that is all of our questions for today. I don't know if there's anything either of you would like to add before we let everybody get back to their hot days. But thank you. It's been a really great webinar, I think, sort of showing how we all together can hopefully have a big impact on social mobility and ensure that children, wherever they come from, whatever their background, have the opportunities they need to succeed and go on to great things. But thank you very much. And Nick, if you want to add anything, or Jamie, if you want to add anything, you don't have to. But otherwise, I'll let everybody get on with their day.